How we do this? We are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of a podcast called Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, an undead host, and you are listening to a new episode. I just said that. I've said it twice now. I'm not going to edit it. This episode featured special guest Rae Knowles talking about two topics. We're talking about two topics in this episode. Topic 1, we were talking about Erotic. Topic 2, the horrific crimes of John List. Why will we be talking about these two topics? Why not? They don't exactly go together, but Rae wanted to do a conversation about Erotic, which was fun, but also she has a short story out now in the debut issue of Ghoulish Tales about John List. And if you don't know who John List is, you could Google him, or you can wait and just listen to the episode, because we do talk about him at great length. The story in question that's in Ghoulish Tales is called John List Would Like to Cancel His Subscription to Omaha Steaks. So if you like a little true crime, some comedy, this is I think a pretty entertaining podcast episode to listen to. I will note that we recorded this episode many months ago, back in, I want to say April probably, and the reason it hasn't come out yet is I maybe had a bit of a burnout happen, and I haven't released many episodes that I recorded, but I'm trying to catch up now, and this is one of the episodes I recorded back in April. What happened in April? Lots of things. I took on too many things at once. I opened a bookshop in April. I threw a book fest. The Ghoulish Book Fest happened same month of April. I also got married, and I think that's it. Also attempted to release Ghoulish Tales. I was not successful with that. Magazine just came out this month in July. But still, happy with how the magazine came out. The bookshop hasn't closed yet. I haven't gotten divorced. We're planning, making plans for Ghoulish Book Fest 2024. Things all happening. So enjoy this episode with Rae. Go buy her new book. It's out now. The Stradivarius? I don't know if that's how you say it. If I messed that up, leave a bad review on iTunes, I guess. Make me feel ashamed. I don't know what to tell you. There's infinite worlds out there, folks. I'm not going to be able to pronounce 90% of them. Who do you expect that? Who do you think I am? A podcast host? Incorrect. I am an undead host, and sometimes we have trouble pronouncing things. That's all I have to say. Go pick up Ghoulish Tales, issue 1. Buy it any place you buy books. You can get it at ghoulishbooks.com. You can come to my bookshop, also named Ghoulish Books. You can find it in Selma, Texas, the tip top of San Antonio. I believe that's it. I have nothing else to tell you. Enjoy my conversation with Rae. On today's show, we will be talking about two things that I don't think have anything to do with each other. We will be talking about Erotic and the horrific crimes of John List. But both tie into the fiction that you write. Please explain.
Yeah. So, and I think you're right. I don't know how to masterfully link these two things, but I can tell you I am a lover of true crime. I don't know if you caught it when I was on video for a moment, but I'm wearing my Last Podcast on the Left t-shirt, and I'm just, a fanatic for all things true crime. And I'm also always very interested, and always have been, to talk about the erotic. And I just sort of love blending horror and eroticism. So yeah, I don't know that I can like brilliantly explain how they go together. Just that I love both of them.
I think that's the safest way to explain how they do go together, because I think trying to find like a way to connect them maybe would get you on a list and not John
Yeah.
list.
No, totally, totally. Yeah. I'm certainly not sexually interested in true crime. So I don't want to give that misconception. But I do thoroughly enjoy, listening to podcasts about true crime, documentaries, and equally love erotic horror.
Awesome. I think it's a good thing that you said that, because there is like a subculture, right, of folks who are all sexually attracted to these famous serial killers, and that'll be a different episode with a different guest one day, I guess.
Yeah, most likely. And I think, the type of true crime that I tend to gravitate towards is actually on the opposite end of that spectrum, which it tends to look at these notorious figures really for who they were, which is most of the time sort of bumbling idiots, to be honest. And far from the romanticized version that I think some of those other folks get of them, which is strange and horrific in its own right.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just said is also a review I read once of this podcast. That's not true. No one's ever reviewed this podcast. Moving on. So someone listening to this podcast might be confused. They might be thinking, erotic and the whole genre? How could that be? What does that mean? How like a caveman, I guess, would be saying this. So if this caveman was listening to the podcast somehow, like maybe they invented an iPhone or something, and they discovered this episode, how would you explain the merging of these two genres? Like, how could this be? How?
Yeah. So I guess firstly, I think these cavemen are on Twitter. So I wouldn't, put it past them to find this podcast. So happy to explain to the best of my ability. And I guess I'll just start with how I stumbled on erotic horror, which was through Ghost Orchid Press put out a call for Les Petites Morts, an anthology they were putting together on erotic horror. And that was the first time I had really given any thought to that subgenre and just sort of dug into it and what it meant. And I just have been in love with it ever since. I wrote a story for that call, and I was just fascinated by sort of the parallels in building tension in a sort of crescendo between the erotic and the horror genre, and was really interested in how that could play off each other in different ways, both sort of including the grotesque within the erotic, and just other ways to sort of play with that tension building and ultimate climax, right? For lack of a better word, in unexpected ways. So that's kind of how I stumbled into it. And I've been writing that way mostly ever since. I think, with the exception of a few stories, including the John List story, which doesn't have any erotic elements, I've found that I've been really leaning into that.
Yeah. For one thing, I've just realized this episode is going to have many awful puns. So anyone listening who is not in agreement with that, you might want to stop listening now, because it's going to keep happening.
Oh yeah.
Also, like, what do you think I think a lot of genres, they typically have like a mission. The writer wants the reader to leave like vibing with. Like typically, not always, but a lot of the time with the whole genre, you want to make them feel bad. Um, but I imagine with the erotica, you want them to feel the opposite of bad. So it's interesting to think about like what is the ultimate intention with both of these genres together. It's like a good bad, bad good. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's such an interesting question. And it's something I've actually discussed recently with some of my writing friends around just broadly, what are you trying to evoke with your horror? I think that's a really good question. And I think authors have really differing sort of goals with that. And my goal sort of throughout all of my writing, I wrote a psych thriller, I've written straight horror, erotic horror. There's this underlying current of feminine rage and revenge. So for me, that's what ties them all together, whether it's, like I said, thriller, horror, leaning erotic or erotic horror. My intention is really to empower women specifically through my stories. And I think that erotic horror for me is uniquely positioned to do that because of course, we know that women have been disempowered in so many ways related to sex and sexuality and assault and, all these terrible things that happen in our society. And I see it also, though, as a vessel for women to take back their power. So that's sort of like what I would like readers to come away with when they read my stories is sort of a schadenfreude for what happens to often, nefarious male characters in the story and a sense of empowerment through their own sexuality.
That was a great answer to a question asked by someone who woke up 15 minutes ago. Thank you. I realized as I was asking the question that I had no idea what I was talking about, but that was a really good
I
answer to it.
actually think it's a fascinating question, and I think it's super valid for horror authors to want readers to feel scared or uncomfortable with their stories. And certainly, I've written stories where I hope people feel uncomfortable and sort of on edge. But I think it's equally valid for horror to have lots of other goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it often does. I think, sort of tangentially related, that could be why we see, especially indie horror, really on the forefront of pushing for LGBTQ plus rights and, other sort of social justice movements, because I think horror does have the room to do that.
I agree completely. And I'm thinking, I haven't read a lot of erotica, certainly not erotical, a few here and there, but I have to imagine when writing these two genres that it might be pretty not easy, but in my head, erotica must lean toward body horror often just because of the body aspect. Do you find that to be true?
Yeah, and definitely for me. And I will say I wouldn't call myself incredibly well read in erotic horror. Of course, I've read some, but just speaking for my own writing, I love to include body horror in that. My story for Les Petites Morts, which is coming out very soon, I'm super excited about that, is really heavily leaning into body horror. And I think the mingling of body horror in the context of eroticism. So what I really wanted to do in that particular story was use sort of beautiful prose and the cadence of erotica to describe really grotesque body horror,
Mhm.
and just sort of offer a really unsettling feeling through that merging.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I think body horror fits right into it beautifully.
I never thought about this before, but now I'm thinking like most of the movies by David Cronenberg, I would probably qualify as erotical. So many of those his movies can get intimate in a in a romantic way, sometimes just making flesh romantic. And I don't know if I've seen many of the like filmmakers do something like that, but I think I would call him an erotical filmmaker, going the other way, not the other way of body hole, but the other way of maybe a less serious topic. I do want to say last night I read a Silton Schultz story in a Taco Bell magazine. Do you know anything about that?
I'm guilty of that. Yeah. And that, I mean, that story, where should I
For
begin?
those listening, explain what this magazine even is.
Yeah. So Taco Bell Quarterly, is by these brilliant co-editors, right? I stumbled upon Taco Bell Quarterly over a year ago. They are not officially, linked with Taco Bell in any way. But as their website says, Taco Bell continues not to sue them, which is great. Please continue not to sue them, Taco Bell. And their only requirement for submissions is that your story include a Taco Bell reference. So I read this, and I'm in a writing group where lots of folks were writing their Taco Bell stories. And I have sort of I don't know, a rebellious heart maybe, where I like to think about what's the worst thing that I could possibly do with Taco Bell. So of course, erotica, right? Heavily involving tacos. So I wrote this nightmare of a flash fiction, and was stunned. They had over 2,000 submissions, that it was accepted. I think it's my most competitive short story acceptance to date in the Taco Bell Quarterly. So yeah, it's called Taco Erotica. You can find it for free on their website, and it's disgusting and erotic, and you're gonna hate it. Everyone's gonna hate it.
I loved it. I think I read it about at 2 a.m. last night, just laughing in my living room while everyone was asleep. It's disgusting and beautiful and amazing.
Thank you. And
What was the reaction the Taco Bell editors gave you?
I was so impressed, Max, I have to tell you. Of course, I thought they would immediately reject the story. But not only did they accept it, the editor's notes that I received, they wanted me to make it worse. And I have never had more respect for an editor than when I saw the notes encouraging me to just go that step further, and give it the ending that it now has, which I think you would agree is
Yes.
horrific.
I was definitely shocked with the way it went. I should have expected it. I did not.
Yeah, and it had shades of that before, without spoiling it, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't care if we spoil it. But yeah, and I thought there's no other way that Taco Bell can end in real life. It always ends on the porcelain throne. And but the editor's notes really brought in, those erotic elements that I think maybe push it into erotic horror. When I sent it, I was thinking to myself, can I call this erotic horror? I don't know what to call this except a nightmare story. So interested on your thoughts on the genre of that.
I mean, just talking from experience, I mean, it just seems like realistic fiction to me.
I'm delighted to hear you say that. Thank you.
I read that and I thought, oh my God, did someone make my blog public? For those listening, can you describe just the basic premise of this story? Because they've filled erotica and they've filled Taco Bell, but what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, totally. So the premise is that there's a couple. I went with real traditional erotica imagery, in a candlelit bedroom. And, they're having a conversation about what the reader can assume is a kink of the man in the couple, and sort of saying, are you sure? It's kind of strange. And then we see, the bed is covered in taco toppings. And, as the story progresses, we see that, what the man is after and what the female character is actually really interested in and equally into is, using this taco paraphernalia as sort of aids in their oral sex activities. But as we all know, if you eat a lot of Taco Bell, it can really only lead you to the restroom, which is ultimately, how the story ends.
Yeah. And what is the website that folks can read that on?
Yeah, so that's on Taco Bell Quarterly's website.
Okay.
So, if you Google Taco Bell Quarterly, it's going to come right up. And you can find it there. It's also linked on my website, raeknowles.com. I don't recall their domain off the top of my head, but it'll certainly come up in a Google
Yeah.
search. Yeah.
Awesome. Have you considered just continuing to write fast food themed erotic flash fiction?
It's been really tempting, I gotta say, Max. Just like a full collection.
Yeah. It could be
That's
called like I'm Loving It or something, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, totally. The thought has occurred to me. I don't know if I can commit to the bit long enough to make it happen, but maybe one day, we all have
Yeah.
dreams, and if we work hard, we can achieve them, and maybe.
It could have a downside though, because like every time you like have fast food, you might be distracted thinking like, how can I
Yeah.
make this sexy?
Yeah.
And
And
that could be bad.
imagine a world, right, where I release this collection and it causes this Pavlovian effect on like a mass scale where now everyone, when they eat fast food, is like really turned on. That could actually be a beautiful change for this world that we're living in. So I feel like through this conversation, I'm getting really motivated to do.
Yeah. Plus, if you get threatened with a lawsuit, great publicity.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
You said that you had read a few of the erotic little pieces. Any like standout examples you want to recommend?
Oh gosh. So I've read through a good chunk of the stories in Les Petites Morts that's coming out very soon from Ghost Orchid Press, and it's phenomenal. Some really incredible writers in that: Joe Koch, Haley Piper, Sarah Tatlinger. All of their stories are incredible. So I'd highly recommend that anthology that's coming out.
Cool. That sounds pretty good. I know I've seen the title floating around social media, but I don't think I realized the theme of it. That sounds fun.
It's
When is that
great.
coming out again? I think you just told me, but I think I just blanked immediately.
Yeah, so pre-orders are up now. I believe that the official release is June.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to think of what else we could talk about with erotic hurl because you and I we talked about this the other day when we were talking about doing this episode, and it's kind of difficult to make this topic into like its own conversation. Because like what else to you comes to mind when you think of this subgenre, I guess I would call it.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's a lot about power. Um,
Hmm.
I think it can be really evocative with like sensations, and that sort of, leads into the body horror stuff that can happen. I co-wrote a novel with April Yates that's coming out early next year. That's erotic horror called Lies That Bind, and it has, lots to do with power dynamics within relationships, lots of body horror in there. And it's a period piece, which I think is fun. It's early 1900s. I think there's as much room in erotic horror to do, what you want with a story and themes as in any other genre. For me, it just has that like added bonus of like it's also spicy, and I find that fun, in the same way that I find horror fun. So having them, in the same place at the same time is just like a 1-2 punch for me. I think there's a lot of room for the genre to grow, and I really hope to be part of that soon. So maybe
Hmm.
like, vague statement there. Maybe that will happen in some ways coming up. But yeah, I think it's just really an underexplored genre. I'd love to see more coming out that's erotic horror, because it's just, I think, super, super fun.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just the whole genre is fun. Erotica is fun, and all books are fun.
Yeah.
People need to realize that. I don't know if they know about this, but books pretty fun. And
Yeah.
speaking of fun, he recently also wrote a silly little magazine called Ghoulish Tales about uh notorious mass killer John List. Oh,
Yes.
what I don't even know how to talk about this fucking story. I love it, but Jesus Christ. Please explain the premise.
Yeah.
I mean, the premise might be able to be explained by just saying the title of the story.
Yeah, no, totally. And first off, I was so thrilled and, almost fell off my chair to be accepted for Ghoulish Tales. It was one of those submissions that I sent out and just thought, super long shot, there's going to be 1,000 submissions. There's just no way. So I couldn't believe it was accepted. But yeah, so it's called John List would like to cancel his subscription to Omaha Steaks. That's the title. It's one of my favorite titles. And yeah, that's also the premise of the story. John List is going to cancel his subscription to Omaha Steaks. And, again, just like as such a lover of true crime, I have woven true crime into a number of things that I've written, this being one of them. I just get fascinated with these characters. And again, not in a sexual way whatsoever, but I'm in the mental health field. So I like to sort of look at these figures from that sort of lens. And what fascinates me about John List is how pragmatic he was and how seemingly emotionless he was through both preparing to commit these crimes, committing the crimes, and then afterward. It's just something I find fascinating and really wanted to explore. So yeah, I don't know how much you want to dig into the actual story, but that's sort of what led me to want to write it.
So we can dig a little bit into it because it is based on a true event, kind of. Yeah. And if you don't know who John List is, I know you know. I mean, like the two people listening to this. If you guys don't know, it's a guy. I mean, I haven't looked up his case in a long time, but I have in the past. And if I recall correctly, it's a guy who killed his entire family and left them in a house to rot while he fled into hiding to
Yeah.
live a new life. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I actually brushed up on my John List this morning so that I could talk, eloquently a little bit
Nice.
about the case. So I'm definitely not, whatever, an authority. However, I think there's a few pieces of John List's story that I find super fascinating. So number one, the trope that I'm sure we've all seen of a man who loses his job but doesn't tell his family and then continues to dress up in a suit every day and leave the house comes from John List. So he lost his job as an accountant and every day continued to get ready for work and take his briefcase, and he would sit at the train station for 8 hours and come back home. So I find that so interesting that that's sort of where that came from. And I'm sure, have you seen that? It's a pretty common trope.
I have. Yeah, I didn't realize that it came from him. We owe
Yeah.
John List a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it's just fascinating. So, I love that little factoid about his story that really came from him. And then just the planning, the extent of the planning that went into this. In most family annihilator cases that we see, it's perpetrated by the husband and father, and most of the time it ends with them taking their own life, but not in John List's case. And I think that's another thing that makes this an interesting story to look at, is because he doesn't take his life at the end, right? He successfully escapes. This is in the 70s, and I found it haunting that he took all of these steps, right? Including notifying the children's school that they would be on vacation, removing his photos from the family home. And, this is a time before social media and the internet. So by removing his photos from the family home, police didn't know, how to spread the news of what he looked like to even find him. So he took like all of these steps. He turned down the AC in his home to slow the decomposition of the bodies. He left all the lights on, which interestingly is eventually what led to a neighbor calling the police when those lights started burning out one by one, which I think is another really haunting image from what happened with John List. So just all of these really stark images from this case and steps that happened. And I believe off the top of my head, I could have the number wrong, but I want to say something like 30 years it took for them to catch John List. And he had already, started a new life in another city.
It took a while. Yeah, I know that. Also, you talking about those lights makes me wonder when those lamps with the automatic time modes, when will they invented? Like, will they invented because of John List?
Oh, that would be fascinating.
That would be fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, so and in the middle of all this took all day for, he didn't kill his whole family in one shot. He left, he ran an errand to the bank to close his account and his mother's account. For those who don't know, he ultimately killed his wife, 3 children, and his mother, and was like doing errands in the middle of this, made himself lunch. The last, child he killed was his son, and he went and watched his son play a soccer game first, while the other bodies were still in the home. And, it was just so monstrous to be able to do these, activities of daily living in the midst of these murders, that he just really stood out to me as a truly chilling figure. Which is, why I wanted to write about just a really small sliver into part of his fictional day. Of course, he didn't really have a subscription to Omaha Steaks, that's fictionalized, but just, as an example of doing a really mundane activity in the midst of such a tragedy.
I truly love this story. The premise is insane. I can't believe you wrote it. I'm glad you wrote it. I just the whole time I read it in the slush pile, I had this maniac grin going on because I just couldn't believe something like this existed. When I first saw the title as a subject line, I thought it was spam at first until I realized, wait a second, I know who John List is. What the fuck? Because last year I did this sounds strange, but I did a deep dive into family annihilations. So
Wow.
I was pretty refreshed on who he was, and I haven't read about him since besides the story you wrote. But if a quote he said always stood out to me, and it was like after he was arrested they were like, why did you do this? And didn't he say something like it was either like I kill my family or we accept help from the government because I didn't have any money? Like those were his 2 options in his head. How fucking sad and bleak.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things I listened to this morning to sort of refresh my memory was, one of the things he left in the house was a letter to his pastor, which, really summarizing said, you might not like that I did this, but I think you're the only person who will understand why I did this. And he sort of alludes to 2 reasons. One being that he couldn't provide for his family anymore, and that, it would be better essentially for them to be dead than be broke. But the other was really religious leaning. His daughter was getting into theater, and he was convinced that this was the only thing that could save his family's souls. So this was his overture to his pastor, sort of saying, certainly you can understand why I had to kill them all. They were, getting into theater, and we had to save their souls here. So yeah, no, 100%. He had lost his job. He was broke. And that's, I'm sure, the motivation for most family annihilators. And then on top of that, he had these unusual religious beliefs that this would save them.
Am I remembering this wrong? Was he also the inspiration for the movie Stepfather?
Oh, that's a great question.
I
I
think
don't
he I think he might have been. I'm gonna quickly just Google it because yeah, I'm pretty sure I am correct. Have you seen that movie?
I don't think I have. It's not ringing a bell.
Okay. It's basically the premise. It is okay. It is loosely based on John List. In the movies, the stepfather, this fucking maniac. He goes from family to family, like getting into the family. He marries the woman, and then at a certain point, he just family annihilates them and moves on to the next family.
Wow.
But they
Yeah.
have him dressed like John List in a suit and really calm and reflective and kind of the silent type. But yeah. So John List has inspired a lot. He's inspired the movie The Stepfather. He's inspired the dad husband who doesn't go any place after quitting his job or losing his job trope. He's possibly inspired automatic time modes on lamps, and he's inspired this great story as well.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I just remember, did you watch The Watcher, that recent series on the Netflix?
No.
Okay, so I don't really recommend it. I don't think it was that good. But there was a storyline in The Watcher that was also based on John List. So absolutely. For someone that most people don't have name recognition with, he's certainly inspired a lot of media.
Yeah. Um, Thank you, John List.
I guess.
No,
No, it wasn't worth it. I don't think.
no. You probably shouldn't have killed your family, man. Just that's I mean, I know that's a controversial opinion, but I don't think
Yeah,
you should have done it.
hot take. Maybe don't kill your family.
Maybe just see a therapist next time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'm curious, Max, have you ever based any writing or been inspired by true crime in any of your writing?
Yeah, in my new collection that just came out, I have a few pieces inspired by true crime. I have a piece about the what are the names? The Gypsy Rose case.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've always that whole thing greatly fascinated me with the Munchausen by proxy and just the
Mhm.
idea of someone just doing that to the little kid is
Terrible.
nuts to me. And I've done it a few times, so I've gotten obsessed with a true crime case, and the only way to kind of like stop focusing so much on it is to write something about it so I can move on. I've done that a few times. Is this the only time you have, or have you also done that in the past as well?
Oh, I've done it a few times now. So my novel, The Stradivarius, which is coming out next month, which I can't believe. But so it's largely a retelling of Gaslight, but the Stradivarius part came from a true crime story that I heard. And I'm fuzzy on the details, but essentially it was pretty recent, just a few years ago, maybe. Someone owned a Stradivarius violin, asked some neighbors, I think it was, to house sit for him while he was away. And, long story short, he and I believe his daughter were held hostage and tortured for the location of this Stradivarius violin's certificate of authenticity. Because
What
these
the
violins are
fuck?
worth, yeah, they're worth like, $1 million. They're incredibly valuable. And I just found that obviously horrific, but also fascinating that there's this instrument involved in such a heinous crime. So that's like partially where I got some inspiration for the novel. And I'm also have been working on forever. I really need to finish it, this choose your own adventure story based on the tragedy of the whaling ship Essex, which is also what Moby Dick is based on. But I don't know if you're familiar with it at all. Essentially, it was this whaling ship that just made a series of poor decisions that ended in cannibalism, which, I always enjoy a cannibalism story,
Yeah.
enjoy probably isn't the right word, but am fascinated by a cannibalism story. So I've been working on that for a while too.
That's awesome. I love the choose your own eventual aspect of it. And it reminds me, I completely forgot, but like a decade ago, I had published a choose your own eventual erotic story.
Really? I would
Yeah.
love to read that.
It's out of print now, but I can definitely email you a copy. It's called Choose Your Own Happy Ending. It's about
I love it.
it has some ghost stuff going on with it. I completely forgot about that. I can't even recall the anthology's title now, but it was an erotical anthology.
That is so fun. I totally love that. And this is my first choose your own adventure. They're a lot of work. It takes a lot of brain power. I don't think I realized to do a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, I don't recall like the process of writing mine, but I imagine I regretted it pretty quickly. You think it makes you respect like the Goosebumps guy, right? How many he
Yeah, no,
did. The
totally.
Goosebumps guy, like I don't know his name.
Yeah. Sorry, R.L. Stein. We respect and honor you. Um, but no, totally. I really underestimated it. You know, it's challenging enough to come up with like a single plot arc. So to come up with multiple potential arcs is really challenging, which I think is why it's taking me so long to finish this thing. But I love that erotic horror take. In fact, when I first had the idea to do a choose your own adventure, can I curse on here, Max? Is that okay?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so it was going to be sort of like a fight the monster or fuck the monster, choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
So that's partially why I'm so thrilled to hear you wrote an erotic horror one. But then, you know, survival horror, I think, lends itself really well to that like making choices aspect.
Mhm.
So I went with our whaling ship. But whaling too is so horrific. Oh my gosh. I don't know if you've ever researched whaling and what that was like, but
I
just
have
in
not.
and of itself, disgusting.
I haven't read Moby Dick either, although it's one of those I want to read. Have you read it?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I haven't. Yeah, I've heard though that it was written to reflect what it was like to be a whaler with like really long periods of nothing happening, which
Yeah.
is I guess why maybe a lot of people don't really like Moby Dick. And then all of a sudden, this sort of chaotic whale hunt, which is an interesting framing, of course, for a work, and I'm sure part of
Yeah.
the reason it is what it is today. But no, I don't think I've read it. If I did, it was a long time ago and I forgot.
Yeah. I maybe that happened to me too. I mean, who knows what I've forgotten? I don't because I forgot it.
Same here. And sadly, my memory is terrible, Max. It's terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this about me. I'm in recovery 10 years from substance use, and I think that has something to do with it. But my memory is just comically bad.
Comically, has this led to some type of comedic hijinks of you
I don't
forgetting something? Like, oh, I forgot I threw that banana on the ground and then I slipped on it.
I wish. Honestly, I think it just leads to a lot of frustration from my wife from me saying, "You didn't tell me that." And she's saying, "I absolutely told you that."
Yeah, I I can relate. I've had this conversation many times recently. I think maybe perhaps launching a book fest and a bookshop at the same time also leads to comical memory loss
I
because
can
I
only
am constantly forgetting everything all the time.
I can only imagine how busy you must be, but all so exciting. It makes me wish I was in Texas to come to the book fest and the shop. It looks amazing.
Thank you. If I can get someone to say, I wish I was in Texas, I've succeeded
You've
because
done it.
most people don't
Yeah,
say that. Most people I talk to don't say that, I should say.
totally fair. And as a Floridian, I can relate. If
Yeah.
I could ever get someone to say, I wish I was in Florida.
I I've been once, but I forgot what happened. Um, how can people find you online?
So I have a website, raeknowles.com. I'm on Twitter. I think it's at _Rae _Knowles. Same on TikTok. I'm not like the biggest TikToker. I'm 33 years old. You know what I mean? It's not easy, but I'm on Twitter quite a bit. So that's a good place to find me.
If TikTok had been around back when John List did what he did, he would not have lasted that long.
No, definitely not. In fact, a lot of these notorious figures, I think, would have had a much harder time now than they did in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, it's why we don't really have like too many new infamous serial kills like hitting the news. TikTok.
Yeah.
And that was Rae Knowles. Go pick up your books. Go read Ghoulish Tales Issue 1. Leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. Tell everybody the Ghoulish Podcast is back. Stop what you're doing. Listen immediately. Listen immediately. You must scream into their faces. I don't care who it is. It could be your grandmother. It could be it could be a cop. It could be the checkout counter register cashier person. Say, excuse me, as you ring this up, why don't you listen to a podcast called Ghoulish?
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.